Feature Talk: Internal Displacement, Its Impact and the Search for Sustainable Solutions. Please welcome to the stage Raj Kumar from DevX.
It is a pleasure to be with all of you. It is very nice in particular to be outside of my home city in Washington, D.C., where it is interesting days to be a journalist, as you might know, and a lot for us to cover at DevX. I think it was a week before the inauguration that I wrote a prediction that we would reach peak official development assistance. I did not know a week later we would have already reached that peak, and that the world's richest man and the world's most powerful man would decide this was the space to talk about. And so I find myself now a bit like an infamous American tourist doing a bus tour of Europe. I've been in Munich and Davos and now in Hamburg and next Sevilla as the world looks for where will multilateralism come from? Where will support for this agenda come from? Where will support for the SDGs? I see the pins being worn in this room come from at a time when in my city it's controversial to support the SDGs now. So I think this conversation is particularly important today because we will not get to the SDGs if we don't understand one of the invisible factors holding much of the world back. It's visible in some ways. I spend some time in Colombia, and there my kids might ask me, why do we see children who are Andean in the coastal cities selling candy on the street? Of course, Colombia, like many other countries represented in the room today, and those of you who are watching us digitally, know many countries face internally displaced people. In fact, there's twice as many people internally displaced as there are refugees. But we think of refugee camps, we think, of course, of border crossings. This is where much of the attention is in the world. Internally displaced people might be a bit invisible, but they deserve more attention. 83 million people are in that circumstance. And if you put yourself in those shoes, maybe some of you have been in those shoes, you can imagine moving with your family. What gets disrupted? Your livelihood? How do you make a living? Where do you live? Your housing? What about your children's education? Where do they go to school? Maybe your healthcare services? Maybe other social services get interrupted. There's no way a country can reach the Sustainable Development Goals if such a large part of their population is effectively being cut off from the core services people need. And that's what we want to talk about today. In fact, not just talk. The Hamburg Sustainability Conference is here, in fact, to try to drive some action on this issue. And so I'm delighted to welcome to the stage our first speaker who's going to say a bit more about this topic. I do want to mention, before doing that, we have a QR code that will come up on the screen. And this is a way you can read about a call to action that is taking place today here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, and also be part of that action. It's going to give you some sense of what's coming next and how you can engage in it. But we wouldn't be here today without Niels Annen, who is the State Secretary for the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Niels, come up and please tell us more about this call to action.
Raj, thank you very much. Thanks for leaving your hometown, at least temporarily. You are invited to stay in my hometown, Hamburg, but this is great that you're here. And thanks to all of you, because I think maybe having a conference about development issues, the question of IDP does not naturally comes to mind. And I think we have a good opportunity to talk about why that is actually why it actually matters to us. And you mentioned the numbers. So I wanted to say in the very beginning here that for our government, the question of internal displacement is indeed one of the biggest challenges the international community is facing. We tend to talk about the refugee crisis, which is undoubtedly there. And unfortunately, we are speaking about record numbers. But it's important to look at the numbers in a very concrete way. And I still think that there is relatively little awareness, at least here in the global north. There's much more awareness in those countries that are hosting or having to deal with IDP situations. And we know that with a few examples, with a few exceptions, these countries are usually countries of the global south. So I wanted to mention the global report on internal displacement from this year, which shows the number of people living in internal displacement has more than doubled since 2018, reaching a record high of 83.4 million at the end of 2024. So that, ladies and gentlemen, tells you something about the magnitude. And Germany has been supporting the work that has been done on the question of IDPs in a very practical way. We support Robert Piper's initiatives and the call of the ESG to give more protagonism to the issue. I think that's very important. We supported the Secretary General's action agenda on internal displacement, and I do think that the work that we have been seeing has been very important, and I hope that it's not only being discussed here in this room. So this is a general statement about the protagonism, the priority for us. I think that we need to be very clear. If you look at the mandate that are existing for the UN organizations, of course, the main responsibility for dealing with IDPs still lays mostly with the host countries. But what does it mean in practical terms? We need to make sure that protection is possible, that the international community understands the sometimes really enormous challenges to the countries affected, and that we deliver on our own responsibility. So addressing displacement together with the affected countries, with our partners in that spirit of partnership with the international community is an investment in stability, an investment in peace, and it has to do with the main question that brings us here to Hamburg, the question of sustainable development. So I think you all know and make brief reference to that the majority of IDPs live in countries with low income, and that it's, of course, the situation right now that those countries are not only affected by the IDP situation, they are affected by the trade trends that we are discussing here. They're affected because they lack access to capital markets in many places. They are also often affected by the direct impact of climate change. So we're talking about a very complex political environment. So Germany, I wanted to mention that agrees that the development policy has a role to play when it comes to find durable solutions for internal displacement. Humanitarian aid, of course, is essential. It remains essential. So it's not about replacing the crucial role of humanitarian actors, but to truly support IDPs, we need to ask the question, what is really required? And I think we need to discuss about long-term, durable solutions based on a close link between humanitarian development and peace-building efforts. The famous nexus that we have been discussing for so long is, in some cases, live or die matter for the affected population. And so, among others, my ministry, BMZ, has been supporting IDPs and host countries with the special initiative Displaced Persons and Host Countries. And we have gathered also a lot of experience working with our partners, which I think is valuable and which we want to bring to the discussion. There are calls to action that we should discuss, how to commit to concrete solutions on internal displacement, but also how can we help host countries to develop policies that not only address IDPs, but take into consideration the needs and the special situation that many of the host communities find themselves in. So, ladies and gentlemen, a lot to talk. Many great other problems are related to the question of financing, the question of whether to integrate IDPs in the new areas where they were forced to move. And I think it's also very closely related to discussions that we are having when it comes to the question of sustainable response for refugee situations. We should not discuss in silos, but I'm sure under your wise leadership we will not do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will do our best. And let me ask our panelists to just join me on stage, if you would, as we get started. Please come and find your podium. Thank you. We are going to begin. Come here, Carlo.
Okay,
Please.
Free seating.
Yeah,
Good.
free seating. We will
Great.
keep this kind of rapid fire, if you don't mind. We need to get through quite a few remarks, but we want to get to the substance of the issues, as Niels well said. And I want to begin, if I can, with the minister we have on stage, Hallo Askari, who is the Minister of Environment in Iraq, in part because Iraq represents sort of both sides of the coin, one of the countries most challenged by internal displacement, but also one of the countries that's shown some real success in this area. You have a lot of experience across private sector and public, and dealing with these issues. Environment is critical because climate is such a big part of this discussion too. But I think some 5 million Iraqis were displaced during the war with ISIS. Many of them, I think, have come home relatively quickly, not something we saw in a lot of other situations around the world. Tell us about what lessons you've learned there and what lessons there are for the audience here and from other countries that are worrying about this issue.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Raj. And Raj came upstairs and he said, Minister, how can I pronounce your name? Hallo. In German, it means hello. So I said, it's Hallo. I'm the Minister of Environment in Iraq, Kurdish by origin, from the north. And Hallo means falcon. But I assure you, I'm a very peaceful falcon, not aggressive. Thank you again. Displacement of the IDPs. I will talk about two components in there. One of them,
I should
displacement.
mention, Minister, we only have a couple of minutes each, so I just mentioned that. I should have said
So
at the
I will
outset.
try.
Yes.
Displacement by ISIS and displacement by the climate-induced. So after the liberation of Iraq, all the, from the ISIS, so we faced a huge problem. How can we facilitate the return of nearly, not 5, 6 million? So internally, this is a huge problem for the country, for the government, where we all know what happened during the ISIS time and how these people forced to leave their places. But the government quickly realized that enabling returns was not solely a matter of ensuring security. It also required rebuilding the infrastructure, reporting essential public services, and fostering social and psychological stability in affected communities. So one of the most prominent national initiatives was the Stabilization Plan for the Liberated Areas, overseen by the Reconstruction Fund for areas affected by terrorist operations. This plan induced projects related to electricity, water, healthcare. Sorry, I lost it. Oh, that's a problem with technologies. So it's a lot of problems initiated by this. So, however, the success of the file cannot be discussed without acknowledging the vital role played by the international community. For instance, the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, implemented over 3,000 projects through its funding facility for stabilization in liberated areas and supported by more than 30 donor countries. So those projects went beyond this infrastructure to include livelihood support and community cohesion, which significantly accelerated the pace of return. And the International Organization of Migration, IOM, also played a major role by tracking the displacement movement and providing accurate data through its displacement. I will move to the second one, although I have a lot to talk about it, but the second component, which is the climate change. What happens in Iraq, as you mentioned, is one of the most affected countries around the globe, within the 5 countries in the top list, hit by very high temperature, water scarcity, reduction in the green spaces, desertification, biodiversity has gone backward, and with this water scarcity is one of the biggest problems for us now, is causing a problem for the government, for the local areas as well, where people from the rural areas, in order to graze their animals, what they have to do, or they take all the herds to another new areas where they put pressure on the local areas, on economically, psychologically, politically, socially. So a lot of tension between the two groups, the coming and the hosting. So, for example, we have Kurdish, Arab, Sunni, Shia, Turkmen, Christians, and all. So imagine a community put pressure on another community. It leads to what? A hostility between them. So it's the government's job is to how to manage this, to reduce this tension, how to manage through the international aid to help the people to not order to move to these places by programs, for example, I know just the last bit of it. We have a few projects, basically how to teach the Iraqi farmers, for example, to cultivate their land with modern technologies and how to water their lands with new technologies. Again, these are all, the government is working on it, but are they enough? No. So the need for the international community, the need for the international help is still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
For the remarks and for the work, because I think you laid out well the challenges many countries are facing. In fact, we're now seeing 3 times as many people internally displaced from climate as from conflict, and this is a rising issue in many geographies. Let's turn to our next presenter, Turhan Saleh, because you were called out, UNDP, where you are the Deputy Director of the Crisis Bureau. UNDP has been working in this issue for a long time. So tell us more about the call to action. Why are you behind it? What can people here do to be a part of it?
Thank you very much, Raj. I will try to answer the question directly, go to the nub of the issue in this panel. Why do we need the Hamburg call to action on internal displacement? Let me give you several reasons, and a few have already been mentioned. Internal displacement is a large-scale global phenomenon, and it is getting worse, and the trend is going to be ever increasing internal displacement because of the factors, for example, that the minister has pointed out. It is about human suffering. We should not underestimate that aspect of it, sometimes in extreme conditions, and also about squandered human and development potential. It has high direct and indirect costs, which are worth stressing. We don't sometimes look at these. The estimate for 2019 of the economic impact, so it's a relatively restricted measure, of internal displacement in 2019 was $20 billion. That's 2019. I can assure you that the number is a lot higher now. In some of the worst affected countries with internal displacement, the cost of the phenomenon can be as high as 11% of GDP. This is GDP we cannot sacrifice because of this challenge. It also challenges us, internal displacement, to make better use of shrinking resources, to avoid applying short-term band-aids, and I hate to say there's a lot of that going on, to what are in fact longer-term structural problems. But the good news is there is a moment of opportunity. That's why we think the call to action is so timely. We have 57 member states of the UN that came together in 2019 and said, let's do more about internal displacement. We had the Secretary General follow up, as the State Secretary said, with his high-level panel and then the plan of action, agenda of action, which has actually reframed the challenge and also indicated where the response needs to be. And now, and I'm delighted to see sister agencies here, we have a UN Solutions Champions Group, of which UNDP is a member, but with other UN agencies, such as IOM and UNHCR. But let me just say, against the background, this backdrop, the call to action can really galvanize progress and generate momentum. How? The first point is picking up what the State Secretary said. It can help us move away from seeing internal displacement as a solely humanitarian issue. It is partly humanitarian, but it is more than that. And it can push humanitarian and development actors to get out of their silos. I'm not calling them bunkers, but their silos, and work together, because that's the only way the problem can be tackled successfully. Working always with countries, the governments, and others within the country. It can build coalitions of other private and public sectors, external and domestic audiences, partners. And it can bring internal displacement, which to some extent, let's be honest, has been a bit on the periphery of the policy space, much more into the center as a development priority. In policies, plans, and strategies like integrated financing frameworks, like national adaptations plans, like nationally determined contributions, into budgets and into partnerships. And another thing it can do is help mobilize resources from all sources. Just like the problem requires action across the whole of society, whole of government, it can bring whole of financing that is available to address financing for sustainable solutions. But let me add a word of caution, that we need to be clear that private finance cannot substitute for essential public funding from domestic and international sources. We should not delude ourselves that that somehow will minimize or negate the necessity of this investment. So bottom line, change is possible. We have got countries across the world, some represented right here, which are ready with costed durable solutions strategies. Colombia, Ethiopia, Iraq, Mozambique, Nigeria, and Somalia. They're ready to go. So the call to action is, let's step in and let's help these countries get off the ground. So I'm confident if we do that, then we'll be back here in 2026, hopefully, and be able to say that we are beginning to transform the lives of internally displaced people, that we have provided hope where I think there is quite a bit of drift and despondency at the moment.
Thank you so much, Turhan. And I think one of the themes we've already heard a bit about today, and please, a round of applause for Turhan. Please. I think one of the themes we heard from Niels, we heard from the minister and yourself, is the idea that host countries have to be in the lead here.
Yes.
These are internally displaced people, but they can't be alone.
Exactly.
They need support from the international community, and we're in that spirit going to bring into the conversation Carlo Monticelli, who is the governor of the Council of Europe Development Bank. He also right now is chairing the heads of the MDB group this year, trying somehow to bring together the likes of Ajay Banga and Ilan Goldfein and all the rest. And MDBs play a big role, particularly you've played a big role in Ukraine. And so we want to bring that case here. You've done a lot around housing, around social protection there. Why? What is the IDP issue in Ukraine? And what lessons, if any, are there that can be brought to this broader discussion about the importance of internally displaced people?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here to share the experience of the SEB, and most importantly, to give the SEB's enthusiastic support to the call of action, where we are very proud to bring to the table an important experience that we matured over the year in Yugoslavia. I mean, I think it's useful just to remind all of us that the Council of Europe Development Bank, which is the oldest multilateral development bank in the world after the World Bank, was indeed created to take care of internally displaced people after the Second World War in 1956. And we have stuck to our guns in terms of mission. And over the years, we have really gained experience, which is now getting fruition in Ukraine. The first point of a general nature is that the first intervention with internally displaced people is to provide a shelter. So this is just the step immediately after the humanitarian aid. But this is not the end of it, because shelter is not sustainable if it doesn't come together with the means to become self-reliant. And this is where intervention in creating job opportunities and having a social protection are so important. And this is why, for example, we have long combined our housing solution with the provision of microcredit, which is the quickest way to generate jobs and independence. And then moving forward, of course, there is a further stage of securing the integration with investment in education and just in all the social network that makes really internally displaced people being able to find a new home. Now, this general type of lessons has to be implemented in each specific way in each country, and of course, post-conflict situations are particularly difficult. In Ukraine, we have already committed 450 million euros in loans to housing solutions. Some of them targeted, for example, to people who are particularly vulnerable. So we just added the State Fund for Youth Housing that was one of our direct beneficiary. But we have also been doing microcredit, and then we are now working on a pilot project to take care of a particularly vulnerable kind of internally displaced people. The people with mental health issues that are particularly moving for children in a zone of conflict. So as you can see, I believe that the SAB can really bring quite a bit to the table, and so we are, as I said at the very outset, very, very proud to join this call action. Look forward to telling you next year, again in Hamburg, what we have achieved in these 12 months.
Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you.
Please. Maybe I can just underline two things you said for our audience. One is you mentioned children, and I think it's 50% or so of internally displaced people are children. And so when you have your mental image of who are we talking about, that's important to keep in mind. And the other thing is you began to talk about the importance of development finance as a solution here, not just grant dollars, but in your case, lending through an MDB instrument. We have with us Anders Berlin, who's the strategic funds advisor of the UN Capital Development Fund. And so we began to talk as well about private sector and their role, and really kind of an all of the above financing approach. This is what you have done. You worked at Sweden's development agency, where I understand you started with a $30 million fund that became $1 billion. Tell us, how do we do something similar here? How do we bring much more private money into the internally displaced people's area?
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and the Minister's Excellency. It's great to be here. And first of all, I want to say I really support this call for action and UNCDF wholeheartedly. We're really behind this. Now, at UNCF, we really believe that internal displacement is not only a humanitarian issue, and you touched upon it, my colleague here, but we also see it as an investment opportunity. And maybe just shortly for those who are unfamiliar with UNCDF. So we were given a capital mandate in 1966 by the UN Assembly to do investments in the most poorest countries and fragile states. And now we deploy a number of financial instruments, concessional loans, guarantees, equity-like instrument, and blended finance solutions backed by grants. So what we heard is that there is around 80 million or 76 or 83, heard different figures for displaced people. And we also see that humanitarian aid alone cannot really solve this. And as ODA is declining, we want to see how we can crowd in a private capital to build systems that are sustainable and resilient, right? So let me give you a few examples how UNCDF have worked and what we can learn for the future. First, we work with MSMEs. So let me give you an example from Uganda. Here we partner with the microfinance institution, UGAFOD, to create a loan product specifically for displaced women entrepreneurs. And we provided a first loss guarantee and some technical assistance. And this microfinance institution then piloted this product for clients who typically lack collateral and formal IDs, right? So that's one of these features that you want to overcome as a financial institution. And really, the early results we have seen is that repayment is better than average. and really debunking the idea that displaced person is not bankable clients. Another example we have is where we invest in infrastructure. Here we have invested in the conflict-affected area of Kibera, South Kivu, and Burundi. And UNCDF have launched a Kibera Peace Sanctuary project, a blended finance initiative anchored in a hydropower PPP. So we're working with the government of Burundi there to see how we can diffuse the tension in the area by a power plant and some other activities. Thirdly, we empower local governments. So we work with local governments through an initiative called the Financing Durable Solutions, FDC, FDS, and that's with Swiss support. And we worked in Somalia to co-finance markets, solar irrigation, and community center, specifically in IDB hosting areas. In the city of Arua in Uganda, we have worked to develop a PPP for a multi-purpose community center, offering vocational training, small business spaces, and joint services provision, also focused on IDPs. And lastly, just to mention another initiative, and it's a new, bold initiative, Investing for Peace. And actually with Germany as a funding partner, so I want to extend my thanks to the German government for being both supportive and innovative. And what we're trying to do here is, with German support, is to design a blended finance vehicle to channel private capital into conflict areas. And Investment for Peace will, among other things, invest in return zones, places IDPs have fled due to instability. And the idea is really for the public money to absorb some of the risk that the investor face in these areas, and for private capital to come in and drive scale and sustainability. So these are sort of some of the examples we're trying to do to make sure that private sector is part of the solution. I agree with my colleague here. There's going to be public goods that needs other type of funding, but part of the solution should be working with the private sector.
Thank you so much. Please, round of applause for Anders.
Well, if I may just interject, and indeed this is very clear in the group of heads of MDBs, where we are actively working on finding new ways to engage the private sector in general, and in particular for internally displaced people.
Yeah, the idea that internally displaced people are actually investable. I think that's
Absolutely.
a key thing to take away from this session today. There is a real opportunity there. It's not just a crisis, but of course it's very challenging. And I want to bring our next speaker into the discussion. Yadir Salazar is Colombia's ambassador to Germany. You've had a distinguished career in the diplomatic service, including working on even more thorny issues like trade. So this may be easy by comparison. Tell us about Colombia's experience when it comes to internal displacement and some lessons you have learned that you can share with all of us.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. The bad news is that I'm not an expert in displacement, but I will try to convey then the message from my government. A lot of things have been said, and I want to just to mention what State Secretary Annen said at the beginning. We have in Colombia both a refugee crisis, and we have an internal displaced persons situation. And then the answer would be, since we are in a solution summit, how do we deal with this? And I would take two words that are very important. The first one is solidarity. And we don't expect solidarity only from the international community. So the government is taking action, and our own people are taking action. As Your Excellency Minister were mentioning, the territories, people are really responding with solidarity, and I'm very proud to represent those peoples as well. From those communities that are, of course, they are feeling, as you said, tensions. There's a lot of confusion, of course, because this is not an easy topic, but this is number one. And action is, we are addressing internal displacement, and together with this refugee crisis from neighboring countries and other countries, through government-led finance action, through collaboration as well with the private sector, and the development in finance action with the excellent support of the United Nations, with UNDP, and governments like the government of Germany, Canada, where we are together in the group of friends to make sure that we bring solutions to this very, very pressing topic. We are speaking of policies in Colombia that are human-centered. That's the most important thing. We are speaking here about human rights, and democracy, human rights are becoming, trade is becoming a more popular issue, but the government of Colombia is really connected to the human being in all these policies. These are vulnerable people. You mentioned children. I want to mention women. I'm the only woman in the panel, and women are... Women, families, mothers, children, men are particularly challenged and particularly feeling the tensions, both the internal displaced people, but also the people living in those communities. And let me share with you, because you took a lot of time, but I'm taking some more minutes if you allow me. Colombia, despite of all these challenges, has been doing a really good job at institutional level, trying to monitoring, as you were mentioned, Minister, tracking really what's going on, and looking into not the numbers, but into the situations, the vulnerabilities of those people. We are doing a comprehensive and transformative reparation of the victims of one of the causes, which is the armed conflict. But there are adding to this problematic situation nature and climate-related displacement. And if I may mention, there are some colleagues here from Latin America, some ambassadors. If we see in some other, in the region, the numbers of the IDPs related to natural disasters, and they went from 2 million in 2023 to 13 million in Latin America and the Caribbean. So these numbers are really numbers that the international community needs to know. And I'm very, very happy to be allowed to be speaking here and to support, in the name of the government and the people of Colombia, the Hamburg Call of Action, because this is really something that we need to address, and we need to take responsibility and solidarity at the government level, but also at international level. There's something that I want to underscore that is from our Constitutional Court, a very recent ruling from last year that is expanding and strengthening something that I think you mentioned, State Secretary Annen, is protection. Protection is the key word for those individuals that are displaced because of conflict, but also because of disasters. And if you allow me, then I
think we need to wrap up, unfortunately. Okay, but I think that was a great point to land on and leave us with. In fact, we have another intervention, but let me ask for a round of applause first, please, for Ambassador Salazar. You began to talk about Colombia is in a unique place because of the massive refugee crisis, in addition to IDPs, which are caused both by conflict and by climate. And we have someone in the audience to give a very brief intervention, if she might. Manal Bidar is here, I understand. Manal, and we can pass, you have a microphone, I hope, in your hand, or we can pass one to you quickly. There's one right here, Manal. Thank you. And if you could just briefly tell us the situation where you are and connect climate and internal displacement, because people here should know you are with the Moroccan Regional Youth Governments Initiative and a Water Youth Network, and you have organized some 20,000 young Moroccans into a single platform to advocate at the local, regional, and national levels. I mean, it's a very impressive initiative. Tell us briefly, if you would, on this issue, what we should know.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Manal. I am from Morocco. I'm 21, and I graduated 4 days ago. I immediately came to this conference right afterwards.
Congratulations.
I'm an educated person. I have a degree. But instead of looking for jobs and looking into master's programs, I find myself worrying and thinking about 83 million people who are internally displaced, about 120 million people who have to leave their homes because of war, persecution, crises, about 1.2 billion people who will leave their homes because of climate change if no action is taken by 2050. I also think of my two sisters. I'm also with the GIZ Action Network on Forced Displacement. I think of my two sisters from this network. One of them is from Papua New Guinea. And in her country, her community had to leave behind their rivers, their forests, their community, their land, because of cultural violence and because of climate change. My other sister is from Georgia. And in Georgia, they're struggling with justice, with peace, with the basic right of having somewhere they could call home. When we listen to these stories of women, when we look at young people like me with ambitions, we're supposed to find resilience and hope. But how do we find hope when there's no money? There's no money for young people, for women, for indigenous people, for communities that are displaced. And yet somehow there's always money for oil, there's always money for destruction, there's always money for violence, there's always money for wars. In 2022 alone, the fossil fuel industry received $7 trillion in subsidies from governments. We are supposed to, when we look at young people like me, we're told that we should be hopeful, we should be resilient. But hope does not give us climate finance. Hope does not feed displaced families. Hope does not undo displacement. And so, as a young person, I'm 21 this year, I also want to say that the truth and the strength of our generation is not in what we endure. It is in what we refuse to accept. And we, young people, we refuse to accept injustice. We refuse to accept inaction. We refuse to stand by as more and more people are displaced from their homes. Displacement is not a consequence. It is a choice that our world chooses to make every single day. But we can choose differently. We can choose justice. We can choose solidarity. We can choose to bring people home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that voice to us. It's so important. I want to ask Louis Hoffman, who is here with International Organization of Migration. We can bring the microphone back over to here if you don't mind. He is the Director for Peace, Recovery, and Solutions. And we're nearly out of time, so very briefly, if you might.
Much. Very briefly, first I want to extend, on behalf of Amy Pope, her apologies for an unavoidable absence today. IOM has a long-standing commitment to addressing displacement as part of a core part of our migration mandate. And we're very happy this year to be taking an active role in pivoting this work from solely the humanitarian sector into the development sector and in search of government leadership and development financing. We have new structures at the global level, which we've mentioned today, that offer direction and leadership to this solutions effort. It's led by IOM this year on a rotating basis. It will be taken over by UNDP next year and by UNHCR in 2027. And this is the Solutions Champions Group, which brings together the respective protection, humanitarian, and development mandates to help deliver solutions for IDPs based on a light, agile coordination model. Today's call to action supports the open and inclusive nature of this new model of global coordination. I'm pleased to confirm IOM stands with the call to action, and we call on more stakeholders to join us and for new partnerships to be forged in the coming year, not least in the development and the climate communities, so that we mark progress on our ambitious goals for preventing and ending displacement. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis. And thank you, IOM. We are going to close out now with Raouf Mazou, who is UNHCR's Assistant High Commissioner. Raouf, please come up and give us some closing remarks, if you would. You can come and take my spot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raj. Dear participants, on behalf of the Solutions Champion Group, committed to supporting the Secretary General Action Agenda on Internal Displacement, I would like to truly thank the Hamburg Sustainability Conference organizers and all the speakers on the panel for intervening on this very important topic. We've heard from the panelists, internal displaced person constitute the largest portion of the 122 million people who are forcibly displaced. And unfortunately, this is a number which has dramatically doubled over the past 10 years. And most of them, as was said, live in middle-income and low-income countries in contexts affected by fragility. And the Hamburg Sustainability Conference call to action, therefore, comes at a crucial moment. As we all know, large-scale internal displacement negatively affects the sustainability of development and countries that are affected, especially at the subnational level. And as we've heard from the panel, and as recommended by the high-level panel, displacement-affected countries are developing their own nationally led solutions, pathways to lead displaced persons towards regaining productive lives, access social services, participate in the economy, and contribute to sustainable development. And for that purpose, as we've heard, the support of the international community is essential. As UNHCR, we've made strides in facilitating and stimulating public-private partnership for displaced and hosting communities. In November 2024, we convened an Africa Roundtable on private sector solutions to internal displacement in Nigeria, and that was in collaboration with the UNDP and IOM. Participants, including government officials, internally displaced persons, business leaders, and international organizations, discussed strategies to integrate IDPs into sustainable economic activities. And some of the key outcomes included commitment to invest in infrastructure, skills development, and access to finance, aiming to empower IDPs and reduce dependency on humanitarian aid. Our commitment here today, in addition to everything that we've heard, is to continue supporting solutions to internal displacement with our protection expertise, experience in sustainable approaches and related development partnership, and with our convening power to garner support for affected communities. And I would like to invite all those present here and online to click on the QR code to read the Hamburg call to action and register interest. Over the coming months, we all need to come together on this call to action and come back, as was said, to Hamburg in a year to take stock of progress made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raoul. Thank you. And hopefully this is now an issue more on your agenda than before this session. We're all going to take a photograph now to hold ourselves accountable. So a year from now, we know, how did we do? I think we have a photographer who's going to do that. Thank you all for being here.